Imagine the world we live in, where people face a white wall throughout their lives. But only a few days can one glimpse the vast world outside the wall and enjoy colors that mediocre people cannot imagine in their entire lives. Ah yes, that's all I have to say. They're either dead or crazy. Keywords of the novel. Kraft's abnormality notes no pop-ups, Kraft's abnormality notes TXT complete collection download, Kraft's abnormality notes latest chapter reading. Chapter 1 Preface. Scrawled letter you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1 Preface. A scrawled letter to my beloved grandfather. I hope everything is fine on your end. After more than 10 days of unpleasant snow trekking, I have finally been able to find a decent set of tables and chairs to write to you. Teacher Anderson, if you are reading this letter on your behalf, please make sure not to get angry. Because there is indeed no paper and pen here that can write the fancy letters you taught, and even finding a paper and pen can be attributed to this heavy snowfall. Several shortcut merchants were also blocked in this unknown small village, and it took them a while to retrieve this seemingly unreliable pen. As for the paper, I carry it with me, but unfortunately it got wet too. The other few unfortunately turned into a ball of fly ash when I tried to dry them. Fortunately I didn't have much to write about. Next is the business. I couldn't see the talented and knowledgeable spellcaster you mentioned to my grandfather before, who was the one you invited me to be, if I remember correctly. He now has a nickname, like Wendangport Firefighter or something, which he only had half a month before I arrived at Wendangport. The general process is that I burned my left hand while demonstrating the casting techniques to the local college, which should be quite serious. The description of the scholar I met is simply not worth repeating. Of course, this is not important, and it is not appropriate to write it here. The important thing is that when several scholars who were not scared unconscious sent him to the doctor, some small props fell out of his burnt sleeves, which I heard were related to what he called casting spells before. If nothing unexpected had happened, like other less sophisticated fraudsters, the content confessed by his undisclosed disciple was enough to send them both to the Wendangport Special Seawater Prison. But now it seems that he may not have the opportunity to go to prison to investigate whether the legend of ghosts and monsters is true. The doctor said that Mr. Firehand was unable to survive the amputation surgery. As for how it developed into amputation surgery, it can only be said that it is very regrettable. To be honest, I know you're going to nag about things like, trying is always okay, again. Since I was a child, you have been accustomed to telling me about the strange things encountered on the battlefield back then, such as people with fire and light in their hands. Teacher Anderson also likes your stories and helps you study those books. You must have been careless when you turned your sleeves when you killed them. To take a step back, even if there were really spellcasters, they would have been recruited by those big shots long ago. How could they still come to Wendangport and perform spells on those scholars like this? Paper is limited, although I also want to copy the things assigned by Teacher Anderson. It is not enough. I will stay in this village for a few days, and Cousin Ryan will set off first. When he hands over the letter to you, I will be home in a few more days. Signature. Kraft, end of this chapter. Chapter 2. A Stirring of Two Souls. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. A Stirring of Two Souls. Kraft woke up from a brain ache from a frenzy after an exam and found himself lying on a letter. Despite the dim light, one could still clearly see that saliva had soaked a corner of the letter, blurring out on the slightly yellowish rough paper. The letters squeezed in the corner were already blurry. Next to the letter, there is a dipping pen. Even if the ink on the pen head dries up and clumps, and the pattern and model cannot be distinguished, it can still be recognized that this is definitely not the dipping pen I bought on my 20 yuan taobao free shipping paper. It is a defective product of modern industry, but it does not reach such a primitive and rough level. The numb hand can feel fine burrs on the pen holder, and writing with this pen can compete with the operation of a certain dark magic professor in Harry Potter. Of course, the strangeness of this pen is not even 1,000th that of my own peculiar behavior. My hazy eyes glanced at the beginning of the letter. My goodness, an English letter to my grandfather. At least it looks like English. The act of writing English letters to my grandfather, who has never learned English in his lifetime in the countryside, is so confusing that it almost makes people suspect that this is not the same old English test paper I was doing before. Kraft naturally reached out and touched his pocket, but there was nothing inside. He felt that there should be a hard object to carry around here, and the feeling of emptiness was uncomfortable. So he rubbed his eyes and instinctively looked around, trying to find what he wanted. On the wooden tabletop, which is even rougher than the pen holder, there is only a small candle left with a pen and paper, and the dim yellow light comes from this, rather than the familiar small desk lamp. It's even more confusing now. I should be in the dormitory, not in this horror movie scene, but there's another thought hovering in my mind, insisting that everything is normal. He stood up smoothly, without even a hint of sedentary low blood pressure or numb legs. The body naturally leaned forward, and the familiar yet unfamiliar breathing muscles were strong and powerful. The airflow from the lungs blew out the candle. Stretching in the darkness, one can feel the smooth movement of limbs and muscles, which is a feeling of flexibility and health that has not been experienced in a long time. He touched his pocket and walked towards the bedside in his subconscious mind. His habit of dealing with the dark environment surprised him for a moment, and his precise positioning allowed him to sit on the edge of the bed without bias, lift the blanket, and prepare to take a formal nap. In the dark and warm environment, thoughts that were previously suppressed by headaches began to rise. He thought of his grandfather whom he hadn't seen for a long time. It seemed like it had been 6 months, and it seemed like less than 2 months. The chaotic and blurry memories are as bizarre as AI drawings, with the elderly sometimes wearing reading glasses on a table pressed against a layer of glass, flipping through obscure traditional Chinese medicine classics, and sometimes leaning on their swords to converse with people wearing long robes. The ever-changing background switches back and forth between the small Chinese-style rural houses and the thick granite walls, and the sound of small conversations echoes incessantly in my ears, making it difficult to hear what it is. Memory has become a strange mixture like strawberry mapo tofu. What's more strange is that he thinks these are not conflicting. Of course, before falling completely asleep, he groped for the 3rd time trying to find that thing. First, the pillow and bedside, then under the blanket. After a while, he remembered what he was looking for. Where's my phone? What is a mobile phone? What about mobile phones? What is a mobile phone? Did I lose my phone? After a while of shock, the brain, which had freed itself from drowsiness and pain, completely regained consciousness, and now things are clear. A strange thing, after an exam, I indulged in a night-long frenzy and encountered some congratulatory accidents that may allow my roommate to smoothly enter the next stage of learning. Perhaps due to my successful educational achievements or some other fantasy reasons that even third-rate novelists cannot imagine, I was inexplicably thrown into another world, saying goodbye to sub.health from then on. Perhaps due to the distance and wear and tear of the journey, this soul that is difficult to justify even remembers its own name, but the knowledge points memorized before the exam are still engraved in its mind. And the original owner of this robust body, a rural aristocratic spirit young man, grew up under his grandfather's traditional physics education and built a small castle spanning 3 generations. The content of physical education classes since childhood mainly focused on playing big windmills with swords. Around the age of 10, Kraft began to develop into a cultured person under the guidance of his semi-illiterate grandfather. In the standard painful education, Teacher Anderson did not teach him this set of local alphabets that looked like English, read like English, and wrote like English, but were not English. From then on, Kraft became the first cultural figure in his family's 3 generations to be able to read and write fluently on his own. So currently, these 2 are facing both good news and bad news. The bad news is that they have been mixed up, and there is one between you and me. I'm afraid we won't be able to separate in this lifetime. The good news is that it was stirred so evenly that it could be said to be a completely new individual, with memories and thoughts intertwined, like pouring soy sauce into vinegar, adding Coca-Cola to Pepsi, and mixing Sprite in red wine. From what we see now, even if we don't have both strengths, there won't be any rejection reactions. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. There's nothing wrong with elderly people liking to play around, right? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. There's nothing wrong with elderly people liking to play around, right? Kraft's grandfather, the first-generation aristocrat of this family, was named Mark Wood, or he could be called Old Wood. Of course, when Old Wood was as young as Kraft now, he didn't have this surname yet. At that time, he was just a sturdy young man from the countryside, mainly working as a driver on the battlefield. Due to his exceptional talent, although Old Wood did not receive much training, he still demonstrated excellent business skills. When others struggle to drive one, he drives 4 or 5 without even blinking. With such outstanding performance, he went from wearing pants to opening ladles for people, gradually developing to wearing leather armor to opening ladles for people, and finally fortunate enough to become a person wearing full-body armor and wielding 2-handed swords to open ladles. Recalling these glorious years, Old Wood would excitedly pat his knee every time. Similar to the development in most stories, Old Wood gained the appreciation of a prominent figure after half his life as a soldier, earning his current title of Baron and a considerable fiefdom in his hometown. After achieving success and fame, coupled with a recurrence of an old knee injury, he chose to return to his hometown of Woodtown and took the place name as his family's surname. He began planning the construction of his own castle on the small hill behind the town. It seemed as if the first half of Old Wood's life had exhausted all the luck of the family. During the 30 years of the castle's gradual construction, Old Wood's wife died from a plague, and the priest's prayer could not save her life. Next, Old Wood's son, Little Wood, unfortunately died on the battlefield, and Kraft's mother died in childbirth. The entire family line is left with only Old Wood himself and his grandson, Kraft Wood. The newly built castle is shrouded in invisible clouds, and a cursed cold atmosphere permeates every corner inside and outside the stone walls. Perhaps even the so-called gods in the church felt that this fate was too harsh on Old Wood, and Kraft did not suffer the same misfortune. On the contrary, he grew up healthy inside the stone walls of the castle until he was 10 years old, without any chance of encountering danger, and even the sword he played in physical education class was not sharpened. This was already the greatest safety measure in Old Wood's view. Old Wood, who was already covered in white hair, took a deep breath and began to reflect on his pain. He planned to teach his grandson some skills other than the 2-handed sword windmill, at least not to have nothing to do except drive a gourd in the future. So Scholar Anderson was invited by Old Wood to teach reading and writing in the local language of Kraft, as well as content that Old Wood thought might be more elegant, such as floral and poetry. The fact proved that the elderly's choice was right. Kraft went from a child with a mind full of replicating his grandfather's glorious years to a child who could sit quietly in the study. At least after his grandfather gave some traditional and effective advice. After finding a new direction for Kraft's development, Old Wood was finally able to focus on some of his hobbies and enjoy his old age. Speaking of which, this hobby is quite unique, mainly rising slowly after the end of the war. From an extremely niche development to now, it can only be considered a small group hobby, mainly popular among young and cultured aristocratic groups and some scholars. Formerly known as mysticism, now also known as abnormal phenomena, the Church rejects it as heresy, while naive materialists generally believe it to be an undiscovered principle of natural operation. Simply put, things that are messy, uncommon, and unexplainable can barely be counted, including but not limited to burning or glowing in the hand. In theory, the audience for this hobby is completely different from semi-literate and experienced experts like Old Wood. But others are all catching the wind and shadows, while Old Wood encountered it himself when he was young. At night, a group of mysterious black-robed men with flames and light in their hands and painted faces suddenly emerged, able to wipe the flames and light onto their swords. Old Wood's ladling team suffered a lot of casualties before all of them were ladled, and he himself was injured in his knee. According to my description, when I kicked over one, I was hit by the light, and the entire knee pad twisted and shattered like an indescribable part kicked by a boot. A small piece of metal was embedded in the knee. As a pragmatist, Old Wood does not fully endorse the military priest's interpretation of these things as pagan tricks. Although the bodies and belongings of these people were burned according to the priest's instructions, the curiosity and longing in their hearts cannot be burned. From collecting various amulets when he was young, to now filling the castle with strange objects, Old Wood's interest in unknown powers has never diminished. After losing too many family members, I became immersed in the hobby of collecting these things, and it is difficult to say if there is any intention of escaping reality. Speaking of Teacher Anderson, he is even more of an old enthusiast of heteromorphism. I was a well-known enthusiast of studying abnormal phenomena at Wendeng Hong Kong College back then, but I struggled with being too niche in my circle and not having many people to chat with. Old Wood, who came to Wendeng Port to find a teacher for Kraft, became familiar at first sight. According to the Soul of Another World, it can be described as Boya meeting Zhong Ziki, meeting a close friend in high mountains and flowing water, and establishing a friendship that transcends age, cultural differences, and social status. With Anderson, Old Wood's collection range expanded from objects to various forbidden books, and the inventory of the secret library in the castle may have far exceeded the level of ordinary heretics, reaching a level where even a church court would have to take a high look. But not to mention Woodtown, even Wendeng Port is considered a rural territory, and the control of the church in this entire area is limited to Wendeng Port Church and the square filled with seagulls at the entrance. Being able to clean up bird droppings is already considered the diligence of the local responsible person. As long as there is no pagan jumping face who believes in flying octopus faces in the local area, no one will care about feeding seagulls to pagans in the square. The reason why Mr. Huisho came here before was probably due to this. Considering that there is no church in the town, Old Wood can hold 2 stone-carved rune eyeballs as handlebars while taking a walk, and some people must praise the bold design style of this thing, which is truly the object used by Old Wood. After learning that a legendary caster had arrived at Wendeng Port, Kraft, who had just wanted to go there for a stroll, was grabbed and instructed with a bunch of confusing things. He rode the fastest horse in the town on a misty horse and set off. This is not the first time that something similar has happened from childhood to adulthood. Kraft, with his grandfather's happy attitude, strolled along the road and was even more delighted when he learned about Mr. Firehand's performance of a car accident, which saved him trouble. But as the saying goes, everyone has come. It's hard not to bring anything for my grandfather. After visiting Mr. Anderson's former colleagues on the way, I learned that a village here had dug up pagan things. The 2 of them, who were trying to find something to deal with their work, rushed over despite the heavy snow. If they arrived late, the villagers might have handed over the things to the church for purification. Unfortunately, it was only when they arrived that they realized that things were not as they had imagined. That thing is now in the vacant wheat field outside the village, and the excavated part is 1 person tall, roughly a patterned black stone prism. Strange enough, but obviously it cannot be placed in one's hands, and it is not something that 2 people or 2 horses can handle. Helpless Kraft planned to have his cousin bring the letter back first, and it would be best if he could also call a freight carriage for himself from Wendeng Port on the way back. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Do less on snowy days, some may not. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Do less on snowy days, some may not. This time, Kraft woke up in the faint natural light and saw the light squeezed in from the narrow gap. This world already has glass, but it happens to be stuck at a technological level that makes it difficult for travelers to easily profit from it and lacks large-scale production. Glassware is still considered a rare item for the time being, let alone glass windows with higher technical difficulty. So currently, most of the windows in houses are mainly made of wood. If you want to have the experience of seeing the sunlight all over the house in the morning, you can only leave the windows open in summer, which is clearly not possible now. The house currently rented by Kraft is probably owned by the village chief. The reason for adding, can be considered, is that this identity has not been officially recognized, and there are no lords or other rulers in the local area to give an explanation. As long as other villagers feel that this person is doing well, they take on the function of receiving outsiders and coordinating neighborhood relations. After seeing the clothes of Kraft and his cousin, the village chief naturally took his family to the next door to squeeze and give up his house, while also receiving a considerable reward. 2 privately minted black silver coins. Of course, when Kraft goes back to report to his grandfather, he will report 2 full silver coins, the kind issued by the official kingdom. Although it is already the village head's family, it is still not realistic to expect good conditions. The wall is made of a mixture of stones and clay, fixed with a frame made of local spruce wood, and paired with wooden windows that do not fit closely. The warmth effect is in a seemingly mystical state, which will teach a profound lesson to those who are accustomed to undressing and sleeping at night. The interior partition is made of single-layer wooden boards, greatly simplifying the process of waking up companions. Kraft got out of bed and patted the wooden boards separating the 2 rooms with force. "Ryan, are you awake? You still have to leave for Wenden Harbor today. If you want me to be buried in snow halfway, then I can set off now." The window of the room was open from outside, and a golden-haired head with a lot of snowflakes peeked in from outside. Also, urging people to set off should be in the morning, not at noon. It's already noon. The snow is so heavy, what are you doing outside? I went to see that black pillar, and I think we can give up the idea of taking it back. Ryan shook the snow on his body. Although he has been active outside for the whole morning, he doesn't seem to be in any serious condition. When no one thought Kraft could grow up safely, Ryan was treated as half the family's heir, and his year-round training helped him adapt to the cold environment. "Why, I think my grandfather would be happy to have it standing in the courtyard. My grandfather and teacher can walk around it for a month. If it doesn't work out, we can wait a few more days." Kraft wanted to hold on a little longer. "I suggest you go see it yourself, maybe you can knock it off with your sword." Ryan smiled and patted the scabbard on his waist. Kraft arrived at the excavation site with his sword. "Of course, I'm not really planning to use my sword to compete with a large stone pillar, it's just because it's a natural habit for the sword to stay close to the body. Whether it is due to the professional ethics passed down by a family member, or the importance placed on one's most precious possessions, weapons should at least be within sight." The large pit around the black stone pillar has expanded again, and even those who have never personally touched the ground in their lifetime know that dealing with this frozen soil on snowy days is definitely not an easy task. A few shivering men gathered around the edge of the big pit, their expressions unclear in the dense snowflakes. Seeing Kraft and Ryan coming over, they quickly dispersed and gave up their positions. The prismatic black stone remained firmly inserted in the center of the pit, pointing straight up, at a height of at least 2 meters. At first, it only revealed a black corner, which was discovered by a child in the village who stumbled in the field. He dug in anger all afternoon, and in the evening when the adults came to find someone, they saw a large, regular, and patterned object. The villagers, who thought it might be something valuable, dug down and found out it was a pillar. As for now, looking at the bottom of the pit, under the scattered soil blocks, there is a rough black horizontal surface made of the same material as the pillars. The connection between the pillar and this plane has been cleaned thoroughly, without any signs of splicing, and it looks completely as a whole without damaging the coherence of the pattern. The sculptor in the upper part is probably an extremely rigorous obsessive-compulsive disorder patient. Starting from the flat top of the pillar, they gradually deepen the engraved patterns in a consistent manner, connecting on the 6 sides to form a character-like appearance. As we approach the bottom, the patterns spread out in a casual and non-disorderly manner, highlighting the fluid-like dynamic feeling. They collide with the plane in a pouring water flow, scattering on the plane and winding away towards the distance. At first glance, there is even an illusion of a live snake swimming. Kraft took a step back from the edge of the pit, and the loose floating soil fell off the edge, rolling down with a rustling sound. He silently watched as they slid down the pit walls like small mudslides, eventually landing on the snake-shaped pattern at the bottom of the pit, covering a small piece. Is it possible that this is just a relatively large base, and try digging further to the side? He said. The voice was a bit unreal in the cold wind with snowflakes, and I wasn't even sure what I said. Even if it's only the current part, it's not something that the freight carts at the port can solve. Ryan shifted his gaze from the pillar. Perhaps you really want to try cutting off this pillar. Even if you can do it, it's really a pity. Indeed, even in my grandfather's rich collection, it is difficult to pick out something like this. Indescribable. Kraft knew he couldn't cut it open, but just thinking about it would make him feel that it was an unacceptable behavior. The trembling villagers next to him have not left yet. Kraft was stunned for a moment, took out his own money bag, and gave each of them a black silver coin. Which was the agreed-upon reward after completion. Ryan watched as the villagers thanked Kraft and then ran towards the direction of the village, their backs quickly blurring in the wind and snow. The low and clustered silhouette in the distance is a village less than 200 steps away, which was clearly visible when they first arrived. The snow seems to have grown bigger again. Do you want to go back? Ryan looked at Kraft, who was still in a daze, feeling that this treasure hunt was probably over. Perhaps they can return to the port and search for a popular little item at a street stall. In Ryan's opinion, the stone carving rune he brought back last time had a good eyeball. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Starts to get weird. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5 starts to get weird. This is also too regrettable. I have never seen such a thing before. Is there really nothing I can do about it? Kraft touched the withered money bag, feeling a little unwilling. The Wood family is not financially disadvantaged, but it is not easy to get pocket money from their grandfather. The young Kraft developed an early awareness of making a profit from the price difference. Then you take action, and I'll see how you cut it off. Ryan hugged his arms and looked at the pillar with a helpless expression. There was a king who drew his sword from a stone and established our kingdom of North, and now Kraft is wielding his sword to break the stone. If you become prosperous in the future, don't forget your beloved cousin. Thank you. If I can really cut it off, I can consider appointing you as the next Baron of Wood. Kraft gave up the unrealistic idea of bringing the pillar back and turned to leave. Ryan quickly followed him and patted his shoulder from behind. We can't take it away, and most likely others can't. Even if we leave it here, it doesn't matter. We can let them dig it slowly first, and next year we can invite our grandfather and Mr. Anderson to come and see the whole picture together. According to the usual weather pattern of the Kingdom of North, heavy snowfall with goose feathers does not last long. After staying indoors for a while, the snowflakes outside the window had shrunk to the shape of small salt grains. The wind was very gentle, and the distant low mountains had a slight flavor of Jiangnan hills. If you were holding a cup of hot tea now, you would have the feeling of enjoying the snow. Ryan was so bored that he made a mini snowman out of the snow on the windowsill, and now he's trying to insert the folded ice skate into it as his hand. Next time you come to this place, you must bring backgammon. I really don't know how they manage to survive at home in winter. Ryan finished his snowman, and the snow on the windowsill had run out. He didn't have any plans to go out and roll a big snowman for now. Plus today, they have been stuck here for 4 days now. Whether or not they can bring their things back and leave this boring place is good news. Yes, Kraft unconsciously replied. A part of his soul couldn't adapt to this life without a phone, and once he had free time, he would feel at a loss. We'll set off tomorrow morning, remember to wake me up early. I really wish something could happen, no matter what, it's all good. It's too boring, Ryan said, making a hash and pushing down the crooked snowman before getting up and returning to his room. But Kraft still stared out the window, seemingly motionless, actually missing his phone. The local part of the soul does not gain any bonus in combating boredom, but rather becomes restless upon learning about the prosperity and excitement of another world. For those who come from other worlds, while reminiscing about their phones, they also enjoy the current tranquility and natural scenery. He watched as the already dim sky gradually darkened, and the spruce forest on the other side of the wheat field transformed from a group of large Christmas trees into continuous black shadows, extending all the way to the distant stacked low mountains. This reminded Kraft of the days he spent at his grandmother's house as a child, mostly during the Chinese New Year. The fields covered in thin snow spread from the village to the distant hills, but the difference was that at that time, distant lights could often be seen, and scattered fireworks could bloom in places far or near. Although he couldn't see it, he knew that even further away were huge dams and water plants in the mountains, and the water supply in both visible and inaccessible areas was swallowed by this behemoth. The kind of great power driven by lightning and steel never stops day and night, dispelling the confusion and fear of facing the magnificent world from ancient times to the present. When you turn on the faucet, you can feel the power of humanity everywhere from the distant mountains to your eyes. And here, in this place where time seems to have flowed back hundreds or even thousands of years, small villages and the surrounding wheat fields are all areas controlled by humans. In less than 10 minutes, you can step from human territory into pure primitive land. That is the territory of spruces and various unknown things, where the cold mist roams with wolf packs and other unknown beasts in fur and scales wandering, gazing at them in the vast and ancient darkness surrounding the tiny creations of humanity, no different from examining deer herds. Modern people often like to mock the superstitions and foolishness of the ancients, unaware of how thrilling the power of nature and the unknown can be in such darkness. Even the evil spirits in plasma horror films are not worth mentioning in such a sense of oppression. From the stories of wolf packs attacking humans to the rumors of a remote village disappearing overnight, even more chilling content is often discovered long after the incident by passing travelers. The victims have already become indistinguishable objects, devoured by this dark and savage world. And more unknown stories are swallowed up by the discoverers, continuing to disguise themselves with the blank spaces on the map. At this moment, the most advanced weapon of humanity, the sword pinned around his waist, was as laughable and powerless as a toothpick. Even in the most arrogant legendary stories, there have never been mortals who dare to challenge the mountains. Kraft, the part of the alien world, once felt that the earth beneath his feet was so small that it made humans feel crowded in just a few hundred years. All magnificent or eerie legends were invincible under technological miracles, except for the mysteries waiting to be developed in the starry sky. And now, he's a bit uncertain. An inexplicable thing happened to him, two unrelated souls. If they were really souls, they could be stirred together. This is a phenomenon that cannot be explained on either side, and speaking it out will only be seen as madman's babbling. Does this mean that the world is actually secretly hiding its other side? That is a more magnificent and chaotic field, an untouched part of the technology that humans are proud of. It was this mystery that opened a corner in front of Kraft, and this corner alone completely changed his life in an unimaginable way, raising sharp questions about the worldview he had established in his brief past life. It is like a small dark cloud that once floated above the heads of the physics community in the 20th century, like a flaw in the perfect celestial sphere, shattering everything that was once unbreakable. A new theory is needed to make up for this fatal flaw that is insufficient for the whole. But now he is standing in front of a poorly crafted wooden window, facing darkness that devours everything in his sight. His limited talent is not worth mentioning in such an ignorant and terrifying darkness. Even if there is some professional knowledge that goes beyond this world, it is also an untimely dragon-slaying skill here. This is undoubtedly a form of torture. Kraft could feel an unknown desire surging deep within his body, which may have been breeding in this corner of his soul as early as last night, ignoring a person's personality in desires, silently spreading on his own. It is not until all sounds are calm that you notice a vine of it, and then you understand that it exists within your body, with its massive root system penetrating deep into your consciousness. In silence, Kraft gazed out the window at the dark world ere his gaze could not be found. After losing sight, his hearing became even sharper. He noticed that a subtle sound seemed to break his contemplation. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Great music has the faintest notes. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Great music has the faintest notes in this backward world that has not yet been ravaged by headphones and sound systems. Most people can still achieve the first half of hearing and seeing, and Kraft is no exception. He felt like he had heard something, even though it was very difficult to detect and even made people suspect that it was a hallucination caused by being in a quiet environment for too long. It's like someone dragging heavy burlap bags on the snow, grinding tiny crystals with inferior fibers or anything else. The soft snow layer breaks under strong external forces, and then space is squeezed. Countless clever snowflakes break and collapse into stiff snow blocks. That's the sound he hears. If there was no mistake, the sound was passing less than 5 meters away from Kraft's window, and in the darkness where this well-nourished young man couldn't even see, its advance was decisive and powerful. This makes it difficult to convince oneself with a reasonable reason, such as explaining it as a late returning person or a petty thief carrying heavy spoils of war. No, of course not. Kraft's hand was already pressed on the hilt of the sword. Although the lack of movement of the alien now occupied half of this soul, the other half who had controlled this body for more than 10 years could easily complete the difficult action of moving the sword from the scabbard to someone else's neck in an instant. Perhaps he wouldn't have made such a fierce reaction for now, but using the scabbard alone can still knock out an untrained adult head. On. That voice, that slight to almost hallucinatory sound, did not change. Like wandering in place, not far away. It is continuous and low, inexplicably reminiscent of a train roaring past, and before all the carriages leave, you will hear a constant roar. Kraft depicted the owner of this voice in his mind. It must be as slender and massive as a train, but it can travel softly in the snow. Those who have not seen its body can only imagine its body from the long rustling sound. The content constructed using auditory and unfounded imagination is too detached and bizarre, closer to nonsensical dreams rather than objective reality, almost making him suspect that he is in a state of half dreaming and half awake. The low-power running brain mixes fuzzy information with subjective content without analysis, resulting in a train quietly strolling in front of him. But he knew he was very clear-headed, so clear that he could feel cold air seeping through his mouth and nose, passing through the barrier of his lips and teeth, swirling between the pharyngeal arches, and then being swallowed into his throat. Without enough time to be preheated by the cold airflow in the nasal cavity, the thin water on the mucosa is scraped away, and sensitive nerves faithfully transmit signals to the brain. In such a cold, the body's emergency mechanism begins to work, and the activated adrenal medulla secretes catecholamine hormones that excite his circulatory system. Blood is pumped into the Willis ring through the arteries, circulating throughout the entire brain to ensure the normal functioning of this fragile organ. So is there a possibility that there is really a long and quiet giant passing by in front of him, but counterintuitively only making imperceptible sounds? So it even avoided all obstacles and didn't run over even half of the wooden boards or dead branches in the messy village. It roams freely in the snowy night, and the boundless darkness is the sea where it moves freely. In this sea area, the low walls made of rocks and clay are no different from the void. What it rubs against is not snow, but something more subtle and abstract, lightweight yet capable of supporting a massive body to move with its will. Kraft didn't understand how he understood all of this from the faint voice, or simply didn't need to think, as the vast and bizarre content was already embedded in this voice. He felt that his thoughts had never been so active before, whether it was waving an iron sword or writing answers that were already familiar to his heart, they could not be compared to now. That is the metal forged with a hammer and burned red, thoughts splattering like sparks. The boiling soul makes it difficult for human skulls evolved over millions of years to accommodate. With the passage of time, the already filled mind is filled with more information. Usually, one does not expect things to be flipped out from under the water, and countless contents roll over like lanterns. That thin layer of gray matter tries to find something in the limited information storage to describe what is understood from this sound, thus creating the illusion of thoughts like electricity. This process is completely beyond the control of subjective consciousness, which is like standing in front of an open dam, watching everything known to two souls surge out. The cross-linked neural network has chosen scales among countless words to describe the epidermis that rubs against subtle substances, which is a fragmented shell composed of inexplicable content that allows for contact with the slightest concepts, causing meaningful activities of the verbose subject in space. The subject to which the scales adhere far exceeds the scope of consciousness, evolving from the known to the unknown in the depths of darkness. The sound it travels through is the peeling debris generated by the friction between scales and fine matter. As it leaves its original form, it begins an uncontrollable decay, falling from the space of another concept towards the space that humans can perceive, and ultimately disintegrating into information suitable for existence in this world. This kind of information continues to spread, like the vibration of spreading sound waves, emitting a final roar before annihilation. However, only souls beyond ordinary people can come into contact with this information in special circumstances. Before the poor aqueous organic tissue protected by the hard calcium salt dome boils, they passively comprehend the existence of that source. And now, this tiny lucky individual, composed of two souls mixed together unexpectedly, has reached a subtle passing line due to double the amount but not expanding, and is able to hear the unimaginable things from his too barren and boring short lives. He cannot describe it in human language, he can only define it as an indescribable existence that transcends the reality he knows. On the edge of madness, he grasped the meaning behind the stone pillar patterns he saw during the day. Those things that fell from a higher level, twisted and transformed in the process of falling, and came into this world. But the recipient cannot understand its true meaning, describing it as a giant snake in the darkness, winding endlessly, with its body submerged in endless darkness, using the elements that exist in this world. Kraft was lost in his wild thoughts, everything around him was far away, and he didn't even know if he was still standing by the window. Until one hand touched his shoulder. "Kraft, you didn't stand here all night, did you?" "Kraft." Vision returns in an instant, and under the rare sunlight, the pupil sphincter contracts violently. In a sense of weightlessness, Kraft found his stiff body rapidly leaning forward with the thrust from his left shoulder, and the pure white windowsill magnified in front of him at a terrifying speed. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Protection Mechanism. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Protection Mechanism. Dong. As Ryan's expression shifted from doubt to shock, Kraft's forehead heavily hit the windowsill. The thin snow accumulated last night failed to provide a cushioning effect, and he immediately had a prominent red mark on his head. Some disobedient hands and feet, as well as the temporarily striking position sensors, did not allow him to react. He just leaned against the wall and collapsed to the ground. Ryan, who was still in a state of confusion and panic, quickly stepped forward to help Kraft up and transferred him to the bed in an awkward position of being held by a princess. When he reached out to lift Kraft's blonde hair on his forehead, he realized that the unusually high temperature on his forehead was more severe than the red scar that was just a flesh wound. As a cousin who was several years older, Ryan took care of Kraft when he had a fever in his childhood. Even though those memories were blurry, he could still conclude that such high temperatures were too exaggerated, far exceeding the average level of heat and approaching the level of scalding. Moreover, Kraft remained silent, from hitting his head to being moved to bed without even making a faint moan of pain, completely in a state of confusion. Kraft. Ryan used Old Wood's secret battlefield rescue technique, vigorously tapping Kraft's cheek in an attempt to awaken his consciousness. When he realized that his two palms couldn't wake up, he decisively grabbed a handful of snow on the windowsill, compacted it, and applied it to Kraft's forehead for a simple and effective physical cooling. Ryan straightened Kraft's head and found him still staring straight ahead, without any intention of responding to his atrocities. "I'll go next door and ask if there's a doctor here." Lie down and don't move around. Symbolically, Ryan got up and ran towards the door. After a few steps, he turned back and closed the window that had been open all night. He pulled out half of the blanket from under Kraft and covered it with it before rushing out all the way. After an unknown amount of time, as Kraft gradually broke free from the chaos and could barely regain control of his face, his panting cousin dragged a middle-aged man who looked no different from the other villagers into the door, followed by the village chief who was out of breath. After Ryan became the village chief, the two of them stumbled upon the only person in the village who knew how to use soil sampling methods. After searching the village but failed, they finally found the person they were looking for at the stone pillar. Ryan only then realized that among the people they had hired to dig the pit before, there were local doctors from the village. At most, this part-time doctor and a few others, with relatively generous compensation, were unable to dig up the entire thing. They felt a bit guilty, and due to the idea of being idle in winter, they saw the rare sunshine today. They agreed to dig a few more holes and chat to pass the time. A group of 3 ran back to the doctor's house to pick up his tools and herbs, and it had already been half a morning. So when Ryan brought the people back, he could already see Kraft squeeze out an indistinguishable expression and mutter in a vague voice, combined with his image of a bar on his head and swollen cheeks, which was quite comical. He lay in bed, listening to his relieved cousin describe his condition to half a doctor. In the absence of personal history, past history, family history, marriage and childbirth history, and no specialized physical examination, this guy, in Kraft's eyes, is far more amateur than the doctor who amputated the firearm. Based solely on the oral complaints of his family and half of his current medical history, he made a diagnosis. Your illness, I think, is a characteristic disease of our village. In his account, which was a bit difficult to understand due to his accent, Kraft and Ryan learned that he was still a doctor with a legacy. From their unverifiable ancestors to this generation, they have worked as part-time doctors in this village, supporting the grassroots medical and healthcare industry with technologies that are basically in line with the average medical level of this era. The main business is generally bloodletting therapy and traditional Chinese herbal medicine treatment. Compared with the clinics in the city, it wins in the orderly inheritance, but loses in the lack of high-tech such as amputation enema. This medical model, which only exists in the hearsay of historical materials and the soul of another world, is not only simple and unadorned, but also efficient slaughter. However, objectively speaking, after the doctor unexpectedly proposed bloodletting therapy and local specialty medicine treatment, it did promote Kraft's early recovery of speech ability. He used his slightly tingling lips and squeezed out a few words with all his might amidst the doctor's surprised gaze. No need, I'm much better now. In the continuous fright, Kraft's brain had returned to normal except for still having difficulty moving his torso and limbs. When Ryan applied ointment to the scar on his forehead, he could clearly feel that the high fever had subsided, which at least ruled out the possibility of contracting an epidemic. For everything that happened last night, Kraft only remembers fragmented words like snakes and scales, which can be summarized as having a nightmare in front of him with a big snake crawling past him in front of the window. This is not a novelty for everyone present. In this era where neurology has not yet reached the top of the disdain chain, various complex diseases are still being explained by some supernatural factors. Whether you have language dysfunction and hemiplegia caused by a stroke, weakness caused by low potassium, or body twitching and gibberish caused by high fever convulsions and delirium, it can all be explained as something evil invading you. This nightmare about snakes brings disease, and it is perfectly reasonable to explain it as a trick of evil spirits. Considering that Kraft has rapidly improved, from the perspective of a village chief with some faith, it should be God's blessing that can naturally heal without medicine. Ryan hesitated to speak on the side. Not to mention whether the God of the church blesses the relatives of heretical collectors, he also doesn't know if the accidental impact caused by his shoulder slap in the morning is suspected of adding fuel to the fire and causing minor illnesses. And Kraft, lying in bed, quickly caught a word in their conversation due to the occupational sensitivity of extraterrestrial souls. He struggled to move his hand to push himself, but Ryan noticed his movements and reached out to help him up. He piled a small bag behind him with a blanket and gave him a sip of water from a kettle, making it easier for him to sit up and speak. "What is the characteristic disease you just mentioned?" Kraft asked in a slightly hoarse voice. Ryan leaned over the kettle to let him take another sip, but he turned his head to avoid it. "What is the characteristic disease of your village? It's common for me to have a sudden high fever here." He vaguely realized something, but last night's memories were only fragmented fragments, and more content was lost in depths he couldn't uncover. Now he needs some clues. Perhaps this symptom is too characteristic, and amateur doctors have shown good memory in this regard. According to my father, of course he also listened to my grandfather's words, and even earlier I didn't know. There has been such a strange disease here for a long time, mostly young people, with one every 8 or 9 years. They all suddenly have a fever on their head, burning like roasted in a fire, talking nonsense like snakes, and in the end. He suddenly paused as he spoke, observing the faces of Ryan and Kraft. I felt that they wouldn't blame themselves for the current situation. In the end, they didn't survive for 2 days, and my father encountered the same situation, he said. Seeing Ryan and Kraft's disbelief, the doctor pulled out his set of bleeding tools and said, "My grandfather was a serious doctor outside before he came here, and this set of things was still left behind by him. He said he had never seen such a disease anywhere else before. Even if he talked nonsense about high fever, it shouldn't be all related to snakes, right?" His voice fell back. "Of course, this is also what my father said. He guessed there was a snake's evil spirit here. After eating fresh and strong souls, he went back and came out again when he was hungry." Kraft habitually filtered out his words on his own. "Acute onset, more common in young adults, with fever and delirium as the main symptoms, with obvious regional characteristics. The mortality rate is extremely high, and it cannot be ruled out that local medical measures may have a counterproductive effect. Of course, there are also snakes. This inexplicable element is still lingering in my mind, unable to be erased. His current state is like waking up from a dream, pulled back to reality from a distant dream. I don't know anything except for the most impressive content. The only difference was a hazy feeling that couldn't be dissipated, making him feel like something had been completely changed in a place he didn't know. This hazy feeling is like a drifting project during a past trip." He looked down at the turbid water surface where algae were overpowering on a kayak, and suddenly a black shadow flashed through the afterglow. Upon closer inspection, there was nothing. In self-doubt, it may be an illusion caused by the rippling water waves, or the mottled shadows cast by the rugged rocks and old trees above. It is impossible to imagine or dare not imagine what living creatures are moving in the bottomless deep pool. If he discovers any shocking truth in the dark, then it is now beneath the surface of a calm and rational water, because the body's self-protection mechanism is temporarily hidden. Instinct told him not to extend his hand and try the depth. Kraft avoided the parts he disliked and picked out some of his most habitual ones. He asked those people if they were related by blood, if they had any other illnesses before the onset of the disease, if they had been bitten by snakes and insects, and if they had ever had a fever or cough when they were young. Taking into account the characteristics of this world, he focused on asking about the dietary habits in the village, as well as the small stream that the village uses as its main water source. "Is there any problem upstream?" Ryan watched in surprise as his cousin showed an unknown and meticulous side, and then gave him a few more sips of water to speak slower. The doctor and village chief patiently answered the guest who had increased the GDP of the village, with the main components of the answer being, "Don't know, not clear," and "No." The elderly village chief, on the other hand, remembered the names of several people in his memory and exclaimed, "They are all good young men, but they are clever. That evil spirit is really good at picking people. Okay, I'm done asking, thank you." Not surprisingly, even the patient's family members may not be able to answer this information, let alone the two of them who have never had this awareness before. So since this strange disease only exists here, you haven't considered going to other places. As soon as he spoke, Kraft knew he had said something foolish. The disease that only occurs once every few years may not have some common causes of death here. Moreover, the location of this village is quite good. It happens to be stuck in a location where there are no lords responsible for collecting taxes, and it is not too far from Wendeng port, where goods are bought and sold. There may even be tourists passing through here. Although this also means that there is not enough protection, for a relatively united village, it is not difficult to drive away some wild animals together, and exempting taxes can allow them to accommodate more people. Over time, it may not necessarily develop into a small town. In contrast, the characteristic disease is not only terrifying in appearance, but also probably the disease of scabies. Kraft, who had said stupid things, voluntarily ended the conversation and saw off the village chief and doctor on the grounds that his two brothers had some private matters to discuss. Before leaving, their faces could see things like, he is indeed a wealthy young master, maybe some kind of aristocrat. Regarding this illness, considering that he is considered a semi-time traveler, it is understandable that some other supernatural events have occurred. Of course, he can explain this in this way. Oh, no, it should be called an anomaly here. However, from a rigorous perspective, it is more reasonable for you to interpret this as a special acute central nervous system lesion. It may be caused by opportunistic pathogen or parasite infection. Because the immune system of each person is different, the disease only starts under specific conditions, and the incidence rate is relatively low. It is mentioned in the blurry consciousness that snakes may be influenced by generations of rumors in the village. Subconsciously, there is a connection, and naturally, it feels like they have been entangled by the evil spirits of snakes. And myself, on the other hand, happened to go and see a snake-like pattern on the ground, thinking day and dreaming night. This is the course of the illness. I apologize for my lack of talent and knowledge, but there are so many chaotic cases in this world, there is no shortage of such one. Kraft tried to move his arms again, and this time he moved himself to a more comfortable position without the help of his cousin. All right, I'm sorry to scare you. Although it looked serious before, I feel like I'm getting better, so can I put away that set of bleeding tools? He looked at Ryan by the bed and stretched his foot hard, indicating that he was doing well. Abundant energy is returning to this young body, and control over his limbs is basically restored. Now he feels a bit hungry. Kraft refused Ryan's assistance, climbed out of bed, walked lightly to the side of his luggage, pulled out a piece of jerky, twisted it in the middle, and handed Ryan a piece of it. For a patient who was still half dead just now, his condition is unbelievably good. The powerful chewing muscles give teeth the power to tear and savor the marinated jerky. Look, I'm not a problem. I'm a bit skeptical that you were just pretending. Ryan carefully took the jerky and felt lingering fear. Why don't we rest here for a few days before setting off? No, I feel like I can leave tomorrow morning. And that damn pillar, let them fill the whole back. I don't want to come back to this unlucky place. I didn't get the souvenir, I lost a few silver coins, and almost ruined my own life. It's like biting a lighter. Are you sure? I'm sure I'll leave tomorrow, and you don't want to wait for the snow to melt and ride horses in the mud. Also, remember to remind me to fill the hole. Kraft was a bit eager to put all of this behind him, and he could feel himself resisting from some perspective to delve deeper into the matter. Coincidentally, he had already wanted to leave. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. During the journey you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. During the journey. Although Kraft repeatedly stated that he was completely fine, just in case, Ryan persisted in making do with the night by lying on the table in his room. The next day, when he was awakened by the dazzling sunlight and the piercing sound of the wooden shaft turning, he saw the early rising Kraft opening the window. Kraft didn't sleep well last night and tossed and turned in the darkness for most of the night. He remembered to do something but was afraid of disturbing Ryan's rest. But when I woke up in the morning, I didn't feel tired and avoided the discomfort of waking up early. He glanced at the snow in front of the window. The snow outside has not shown any obvious signs of melting, and a few scattered footprints are distributed on it, adding a touch of human touch to the environment. He turned around and stretched lazily in front of Ryan, his bones comfortably creaking after a day of inactivity. "It can't be any better, the feeling of surviving a disaster is really good," he said. "Ah, that's true," Ryan yawned, "and don't forget about that pitfall, solved the problem of having breakfast made of pancakes and jerky, sorted out a little luggage, and then put on a cloak to step onto the horse's back, embarking on a journey that is easy to walk." Of course, before leaving, Kraft followed Ryan to the doctor's house yesterday and reluctantly took out a black silver coin from his wallet and handed it to the doctor as yesterday's medical deposit. "By the way, it should be noted that I have lost interest in that pillar. Everyone can completely fill it back with soil and continue planting on it next year as usual." About 30% of this reluctance is due to a shortage of pocket money, and 70% is due to a lack of recognition of the doctor's work. However, this discomfort quickly disappeared after the official departure. The period of clear skies after snow is still quite pleasant in winter, as there are no snowflakes blocking the view, which requires full attention on the path to prevent turning off. There is also no dust flying on dry dirt roads, so one can only cover their whole body with a cloak. The joy of riding a horse in the snow excited the exotic part of Kraft's soul, and now he was in a state of familiarity with horsemanship and novelty in riding horses in the snow. Being able to enjoy the joy of fresh experiences without being distracted and thrown off on horseback. After coming out of the small basin where the village is located, the two of them walked along the path in the valley at a steady pace. The long-lost bright light dispelled the gloom in the spruce forest on both sides, with thick snow covering the branches and leaves, and the mottled sunlight shining like sequins. The fierce and dark side of the forest is covered by layers of white and overlapping light curtains, presenting a clean and charming appearance. All of this is a rare winter scenery for locals, and in Kraft's eyes, it has a cinematic texture, no less shocking than watching the Narnia legend for the first time. At this moment, he seemed to transform into a character from a game, riding a horse to the battlefield where he fought against giants and mythical creatures. He even hummed a song to accompany himself. Unfortunately, the two souls couldn't come together with a singing voice, and the beautiful and passionate melody only existed in his own mind. Even Ryan, who had no musical appreciation, found it difficult to tolerate such a tune. He distanced himself from Kraft, maintaining a position where he couldn't hear the singing clearly and could turn back to look at Kraft in time. "So what should we buy after we board the port?" After enjoying ourselves for a while, Kraft accelerated and caught up with his cousin in front. "Where did you find that pair of stone eyeballs last time? The runes carved on them really have a bit of meaning. Grandfather really liked them." Ryan really wanted to say that he was looking for a bargain. He picked an object from a stonemason he knew to practice his skills, and then let him freely carve something on it. I don't know if the stonemason is really that talented, but anyway, Oldwood really likes that pair of eyeballs, and Teacher Anderson also thinks Ryan has vision. There must be a problem between both sides now. Either what kind of strange person is the stonemason hiding in Wendeng Port who can't hold 3 big cups of wine with him, either it indicates that Oldwood and Anderson are conducting research on abnormal phenomena, namely mysticism, which is meaningless. Faced with Ryan's silence, Kraft didn't mind at all. He felt exceptionally energetic, so full that he was willing to pay attention to every sound he heard and every branch he saw. Even if Ryan doesn't hear or doesn't want to answer him, he can talk about something else. "What do you think of the axe I brought back last time? They said it was brought back from the ice across the sea, and they also said it was something used by those ice people who serve pagan gods." In fact, from Kraft's current perspective, the axe, which cost him 5 whole kingdoms silver coins, probably only has a rough shape that is more in line with the characteristics of the ice tribe, with some unknown black marks on it. The captain who sold him this thing explained that it left an indelible mark in the blood sacrifice, but now the extraterrestrial part of the soul has shown no trust in it and is just starting a conversation. He now really wants to take in some information, whatever it is, similar to occasionally wanting to open his phone and see if there is any new content. Well, it's good if they like it, Ryan came up with a more indirect statement. I don't think we need to have such high expectations for it, and Mr. Anderson wouldn't have any special expectations for it. If Kraft really wants to surprise his grandfather, he can let him rest in the hotel for a few days and find the stonemason himself. This time he plans to find a uniquely shaped stone statue and let the stonemason freely play with it. By the same token, strive to gather a collection for the collection room in the castle before next winter. Kraft did not give up on this matter. After this topic was brought to an end, he quickly opened up another topic and asked about the matter at the University of Wendon. How many scholars there are in total, to what they are learning and researching, and all kinds of content that he was not so interested in before, constantly overflowing from the curious baby's mouth. But Ryan is also a rough person, and his goal when he grows up is to become a knight. He started reading at a much older age than Kraft. Despite learning from his peers, while Kraft and Anderson were learning how to write characters into a ball of flowers, he was still researching how to understand simple accounts. Although he has come to Wendang Port much more times than Kraft, and he is also responsible for helping Anderson deliver letters to colleagues in the college, these contents have truly pointed out his knowledge blind spot. At most, he knew that humanities, law, and theology scholars dominated the Wendang Port College, as well as the medical branch that had long been rumored to steal corpses for evil experiments. Among them, Ryan is most familiar with the terrifying rumors circulating in taverns and medical schools. Organs soaked in pungent liquid, horror books depicting skinned corpses, and madmen talking about terrifying knowledge around the deceased who had their stomachs cut open in the late night. These things made Ryan feel creepy when he talked about them himself, and there was also a hint of scaring off Kraft. I didn't expect this kid to get more and more excited as he listened, and even started asking about the details. I asked about the odor of the liquid that soaked the organs and what specific organs were inside. Does the medical school accept visitors from outside? In order to stop Kraft's mouth and maintain his well-informed cousin image, Ryan changed his mind after being scraped off about the academy and started talking about several captains he met in Wendon Harbor. The people who spend more time on water than on land during these years are the most eye-catching focus in the tavern. Their stories range from the southernmost part of the kingdom to the northern port of Wendang, and then to the colder and wider ice fields. The authenticity is highly questionable, but it has an open landscape that people who are confined by the land cannot imagine. Coupled with the fangs, bones, and other objects in their hands as evidence, it has a fatal attraction to young people. What Ryan is going to tell is a bottomless story he heard from a captain he knows, and he has full confidence in using this story to block Kraft's mouth. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Medieval Gospel Warriors. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Medieval Gospel Warriors. The captain Ryan met at the tavern was named William, also known as Big Beard William. He was a local of Wendang Port and came from a good family. This should be a relatively humble statement. This person has a big beard on his face, but he is actually only in his early 30s. At this age, being able to get a ship to be the captain or a two-masted sailboat that can sail far belongs to the typical wealthy second generation, and their family savings are much richer than most small aristocrats. William's chosen route was to run back and forth between the port of Wendon and the ice plain, bringing local tribal supplies such as alcohol and wheat, in exchange for some local specialty animal skins and fur, as well as some items he used to gather when he was unlucky. In the impression of those who have never seen the scenery on the other side of the sea with their own eyes, it is a terrifying wilderness. Wild people, who drink blood and fur, chase after all living creatures on the ice that never melts, whether it is a white-furred bear or an outsider who accidentally enters this place. William would repeatedly explain that some tribes living on the edge of the ice sheet had long been assimilated by merchant ships, and even built small ports, learned the language of the North Kingdom, exchanged fur and or for stable food, and calculated faster than 90% of the people present. At this point, his audience would say, "Ah, yes, yes, you said it very well. Can you talk about other tribes?" Therefore, it was not easy for him to recruit sailors, let alone those who took the boat with ease. There are always exceptions to everything. Apart from the brave warriors who explore the blue ocean of commerce, there are also occasional other people. Missionaries from the Church. Those who know a little about the Church may know that in the logic of the Church, bringing people into the Church is considered an achievement. It's not the kind recorded in the Church notebook, but the kind of achievement recorded in heaven, which directly affects whether one can return their soul to the embrace of the Heavenly Father after death, and how they will be treated after returning their soul to the embrace of the Heavenly Father. Don't be fooled by the fact that churches in ghost places like Wendangport are like salted fish. If you pray that they don't even lay eggs, it's because their main market is not on these poor people. The proportion of sailors on the sea who believe in religion is still high, and some large ships even hire a clergy to stay on the ship for a long time, which is very beneficial for stabilizing their mental state during long-term navigation. You laugh at them, but the Shanghai Gull feces in their square may not be able to be cleaned up. They laugh at you. Why don't you think about why they can buy land in the city that can make up the square? Behind this is the credit of a large number of people who make a living at sea. As for the people who opened this diocese back then, they have long been canonized. The amount of gold in this holy thing is not very clear, but there is no need to say much about the honor before death. After death, it is natural to return to the embrace of God and go to the rich land flowing with milk and honey, listening to the sacred music surrounded by winged things, and having the privilege of serving the supreme authority. Decades ago, he came alone to this land without any religious tradition since ancient times and spread the gospel to countless sailors. Such a legend is a role model for many lowly clergy members in the Church. So, now there's a small question: where do young missionaries who want to emulate their predecessors go? Although the Kingdom of North is not small, various places are basically delineated by dioceses of all sizes. Even remote places like Wendangport became dioceses decades ago, indicating that it was not easy to develop a new diocese. The rare passenger in front of Captain William gave the answer. An ice field. That was a young-looking missionary holding a scripture with a cover framed in dark leather and metal ornaments, with the iconic double-winged circular emblem outlined in gold foil in the center of the cover. The equally young attendant behind him had a worried expression on his face, carrying luggage for 2 people on his back. "Yes, we're going to the ice sheet, and you don't have to bring us back. If possible, please put us down in a port without a church." His lips, still not surrounded by his beard, calmly spat out a rather outrageous request. The distress on the face of the attendant behind him increased, and he looked at William with a pleading gaze, hoping that he could refuse this business deal. William initially did not want to accept such passengers. This young clergyman, accompanied by attendants, is likely the second son of a nobleman who has no inheritance rights and was sent to the church for development. If nothing unexpected happens, such a person would probably climb to a relatively high position based on their family status, and at least manage a small church. If we bring him over and lose him on the ice, whether it's his own request or not, it's likely to cause further trouble. This kind of person either loses their head after listening to many legendary stories, or has a last-minute uprising after a conflict with their family. In any case, a normal person would not be able to wear such an inconvenient priest's robe and carry a hardcover version of the scripture to preach in the ice field. It can be seen that he has tried to appear ordinary as much as possible. This long and leggy clerical robe is probably a mass-produced item issued by the Academy, and it completely does not match the scriptures in his hand and the attendants behind him. This set of operations, which can be considered as human deception, has opened William's eyes. Is there really such a double force in this world? For the sake of avoiding trouble, combined with William's remaining conscience and the pressure brought by the pleading eyes of his followers, he wanted to dissuade this guy who probably only had a double-winged ring in his mind. "Your faith is admirable to me, but the people on the ice field all believe in their barbaric pagan gods, which is not a suitable place for people of your identity to go. William felt that he had done very well, taking care of the other person's face and explaining the basic situation there. Don't worry what they believe, the competition is quite fierce and it's not suitable for someone like you who can't handle big things to explore new fields. After speaking these words, he could already see a glimmer of hope in the eyes of his followers, even his back, which had been bent by his luggage, straightened up a bit again. Unfortunately, it is clear that they still underestimate a person with an abnormal brain. God will point the way for true devout people, and I cannot tolerate his people being deceived by false gods disguised by demons. My family also recognizes my choice. Even if I am called upon on this path to go to the land of milk and honey too early, you don't have to worry about them blaming you. Perhaps thinking of the scene in the story of the church where the saint faced the test, the hairless missionary firmly raised his head, his smooth hair shining brightly in the sunlight, filled with a holy aura, which made his followers even darker. But William was foolish. He himself is also a shallow believer, and he usually goes to church to pray before going out to sea. He has seen many priests, but this posture is still the first time in his life. You should think about it again, it's too. He has seen those cults of pagan gods on the ice field, usually those with arms thicker than his thighs and able to perform blood sacrifices on living beasts. Letting this one compete with them without restrictions is truly heartfelt. I am willing to offer a maximum of 18 coins, I mean castle coins. Castle gold coins, formerly known as Westminster gold coins, are official gold coins issued by the kingdom, usually minted by the king and several nobles. On the obverse is the sword in stone emblem of the royal family, and on the reverse is the iconic wide sloping city wall and twin towers of Westminster Fortress, from which the castle coins are named. It is a highly pure hard currency. Of course, if you don't want to, could you recommend another captain to me? The young missionary looked at William, who was stunned and somewhat disappointed. A few days later, on the deck of the iceberg. Father Frank, isn't the scenery of the North Sea good? William, who asked the other person's name, had already started calling him a priest. Anyway, we're going to build a church, so it's not wrong to call it that way in advance, as long as the owner is happy. Isn't it, 18 gold coins, just to rush to the ice field and die? Kraft's eyes widened upon hearing this. Poverty limited his imagination. Don't interrupt me. Ryan was speaking happily as he gestured for Kraft to ride slower so he could continue. That's not the point of the story. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Highlights of Pragmatism. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10 highlights a pragmatism from the perspective of the Kingdom of North. The Ice Sea can also be called the North Sea. Starting from Wendeng Port, heading northeast, you will soon enter this sea area. As the name suggests, the Ice Sea is named after its fragmented floating ice. Among these broken ice, the small ones are probably not enough to fit a wine barrel, while the large ones are called icebergs as they can barely hold on. At the same time, because the speed of ships in this era is not optimistic, there will not be a couple, you jump, I jump, at the bow of the ship in this sea area for the time being. The most serious situation is likely to be hitting a mini iceberg at night, requiring a wooden board to repair the bottom compartment and then scooping out the water with a wooden bucket. So, after more than 30 days of smooth sailing, the medieval evangelist Frank successfully set foot on the land of the ice sheet. In this short period of just over a month, this future priest has endured a test that has never been experienced in his past life. Firstly, there was severe seasickness, followed by severe diarrhea caused by consuming sea fish caught by crew members. Finally, as he approached the north and the temperature continued to decline, he found that the clothes he had imagined carrying alone were not enough to withstand this severe cold. Fortunately, William still had a few pieces of fur left in his hand. He sold them to Frank and his followers for a genuine friendship price. 3 kingdom silver coins per piece. This price is too honest, it is difficult to say that there is no apology for the act of sending someone to seek their own death. These experiences may not be considered friendly, but soon William realized that he really underestimated this kid. This seemingly delicate missionary miraculously managed to hold on, while his attendants were holding onto the mast and vomiting, while Frank held on to his holy book tightly. You should know that William had already prepared a plan for him to back out halfway, and would only refund him half of the shipping fee. If it weren't for his mouth opening and spitting out, William felt that Frank would surely praise the classic part of the saint's suffering, but the messy design made him look less holy than when he set out. At the moment he stepped onto the icy land, this missionary gained basic respect from all the members of the ship, including William, and at least everyone had some experience of his faith. Out of respect for his faith, William decided to try again to change his mind. After all, seeing a decent person die in this unreasonable place was a bit unacceptable psychologically. Anyway, the ticket money has already been received, and considering this lucrative income, it's not impossible to work overtime. After returning, I will also have an additional network. With such thoughts in mind, William personally helped Frank, who was a bit drifting, off the ship and stepped on the rudimentary dock. Rather than being a dock, it is more like a stone embankment built along the coastline with scattered stones, just to mark a less easily stranded parking area along the vast coastline. The large black stones are filled with small stones and sand, and from a distance, they still have some shapes. However, from a closer look, you can say that this is the masterpiece of nature, and others believe it. More than a dozen plush figures have long been waiting at the dock. Their faces are painted with indistinguishable facial patterns, and their fur suits from head to toe are equivalent to a set of plate armor in terms of material, with a sewing process that is about non-existent. Their practical value can be given full marks locally. Seeing William and his group disembark, they did not remove the weapons they were carrying. The tall man, who was noticeably taller than his companions around him, walked forward and greeted William with a bear hug with a texture of real bear fur. He greeted William in a fluent Wendon Harbor dialect. "Aha, William, this is really a surprise. It's 2 whole days earlier than expected." "Of course, I don't want my friends to wait long," William waved to Frank behind him, gesturing for him to come over. The attendant, who was gasping for breath on the ship, leaned on a sword and followed closely, cautiously examining the tall man in front of him. "By the way, this is named Bjorn, whose name means he is as strong as a bear. More than a dozen people here have to listen to him," William introduced to Frank. "By the way, have you ever taught the language of the snowfield? I have to tell you that his behavior is a special case." Very good, the first step got stuck, and William didn't expect Frank to never consider it at all. This is also very reasonable. He probably thinks that Norse is a universal language, or simply thinks that coming to Bingyuan is not considered going abroad. This is certainly very good and has had a significant deterrent effect. So William turned his back to Frank and gestured to Bjorn as the Iceman clenching his fist and smashing it downwards, meaning to scare him. He continued, "This deity who wants to come to the ice field to recommend him to you, could you please explain the rules here to him?" Bjorn understood the gesture and said, "It's simple. We don't have many rules here in the ice sheet, as long as we go through our traditional rituals. Let's move things back now." He pulled a sled made of rare wood from the ice sheet and began unloading from the ship. Frank listened to Bjorn's simple words, but when he arrived at the place, he realized that the only simple part of the matter was to explain the process clearly. From this settlement near the port, looking deeper into the ice sheet, there is barren land covered in ice and snow. At the end of the field of vision, towering mountain ranges rise from the ground, presenting a wave-like posture. This natural dividing line divides the true primitive ice sheet and the relatively mild region on this side of the mountain range. The wall construction method here is similar to that of the Kingdom of North, but the wooden structure is omitted, and a dome-style building similar to a snow house is used. On the one hand, it is because the vegetation here only consists of low shrubs and moss. On the other hand, it is also because in areas where it is always below zero, you really don't need to consider using clay to stick the stones together and they will scatter, let alone worry about the problem of rain wetting and loosening. Only blizzards. Release the human sled. Bjorn pointed to a big stone next to the settlement that was even higher than the house and said, "Do you see that black big stone over there? That's where the ceremony started." Amidst the puzzled gaze of Frank and his entourage, he explained with a suppressed smile the religious tradition of the Ice Age people. As we all know, survival on the ice is the biggest problem since ancient times, and all religious content revolves around this. Of course, if you want to show that your God is worthy of faith, it depends on whether your God can bestow powerful survival abilities on people. The old rule is to start from the starting point set by the tribe, without wearing clothes, tools, water or food, and head towards the distant mountains. In that mountain range composed of black rocks, there are countless caves. In the depths, you will find living stones. Just knock a piece and bring it back as proof. The entire process may vary depending on the distance between each tribe and the mountain range, lasting from several months to a year. The tribe will use a primitive democratic voting method to select a few people to follow from afar as witnesses to this ceremony. As for living stones, according to Bjorn's description, they are similar to most of the stones on this ice sheet. The stones used to build houses, the stones used as starting points, and the stones that make up the mountains are all the same type of black rock, but their difference lies in the fact that they are alive at first glance and can only be found deep in caves in the mountains. The small pieces knocked down will die within a few days, and can only be verified by witnesses on the spot. After arriving at the place, you can choose a cave to go in and get it yourself. Anyway, your God will guide you. Everyone won't follow because it's not easy to come out after entering. How do you survive without clothes, tools, or food? There are animals on the ice sheet. Use the power bestowed upon you by God to demand from them. As long as you can complete this ceremony and prove that your God can truly give people the power to live, the tribe will undoubtedly build the strongest house for the spokespersons of the gods. The living stone you bring back will be embedded in the wall as proof of the miracle. The old sacrifice was inspired by the stone god 30 years ago and completed this feat under the witness of several trusted warriors, so the entire tribe converted to the stone god. When he dies, his successor will also perform this ceremony. However, considering that people inspired by gods are actually very rare, most of the time the tribe is in a state of non-faith. To be honest, William was also listening to this for the first time. He looked at Bjorn with a puzzled look, indicating whether he had fabricated too harshly. "Don't look at me, everything I say is true. We never joke about it." He gestured for the physical difference between the two sides and laughed. "To be honest, I never thought what it would be like for the Norse to participate in this ceremony, but as far as I know, although there are quite a few of your sacrifices, there aren't many like our old ones who possess divine power, right?" End of this chapter.